Hello and welcome to the December meeting of the Seneca County Industrial Development Agency. We have a quorum, so let's begin. First item on the agenda is the approval of the IDA meeting minutes from November 3rd. Everyone received a copy in their packet. Any questions or revisions or changes? Hearing none, have a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. Meeting minutes approved. Second item on the agenda is the IDA financial statements. Everyone received in front of them, there's a sort of a copy of some of the more explanation of the fixed assets. We'll go over that in just a second. Looking at the regular financials, there's just a few items to note. One, looking at the balance sheet, the Pine Tree Farms end up paying off their loan early in November. So that's, not only are they current, but they're fully paid off. We did finish off the transfer of the training center that was at the depot. So that was done earlier in the year, and we finished doing all the financial transactions and depreciation, and we'll get to that in just a couple minutes. So that got closed out there. Looking at the income statement, what we really have here, the two things to note, is an agency fee from Keystone Mills of $103,000. We received that. And the other one, again, is the property sale, the transfer of the training center, which really was a loss of $723,000. Another one is sort of like the sewer 414 sewer line, where we own an asset, and then, which is worth essentially nothing to us, we transfer it to the county, and we end up with a loss on the books. So what that does, and Bob put this together, so if there's any good questions, ask him. But what we ended up doing is, after that, which was a fairly large loss, where do we stand for fixed assets? So if we look at where do we stand today, on the bottom, really we're down to just under 317,000 of fixed assets.
As book value.
Book value, as before we're up in the multiple millions at one point. And what we have remaining for land is the Excellus building that's near Walmart, conservation area, depot, some remaining book value of the IDA office, and the industrial park, what's left that we haven't sold off. So I guess, anyone have any sort of questions on this? Because this can be a little confusing. And Bob, I don't know
Oh,
if you
the
have anything.
impact it has is not only on the P&L statement, but our balance sheet is shrinking
Yeah.
considerably by the transactions that have occurred in the last 2 years, especially in the fixed asset arena. So, but we expected that was going to take place.
Yes. So now, essentially, in terms of, assets that we're sort of holding for others, those are done.
So isn't that part of the strategy of the IDAs to have these assets out there working rather than just hold on to them?
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not really a bad thing by any means that the sewer line and the fire training center are no longer on the IDA balance
For
sheet.
years to move them off.
Yeah.
The only problem
Yeah.
I have with it is actually you have a truer statement today than you did. The problem with it, before you looked and you had this huge net worth out there that anybody in the county could all say, well, God, look at all the value you guys have. You have all these assets. They're assets that we aren't going to keep and aren't going to be here, but they're on our books. So You don't like to see this kind of a drop in your equity position, but it really is a truer statement today than it was before. I always argued they shouldn't have been on, should have had a liability because they were going to have to go at some point anyhow, but that's not how it works, so.
Circumstantial situations, unfortunately.
So, no, it's what it is. Now you just have to replace it with like, good assets like investments and cash.
So any questions on the financial statements? Hearing none, we have a motion to approve.
So, man,
Second? All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? No. Motion carried. Next on the agenda is the review and approval of the IDA resolution, request for consent under the leaseback agreement from BonaDent.
I'm going to turn it over to Danielle and Sean to address the board.
I'll do a quick intro and then it's kind of exciting. Some of you were on the board back in the 90s when Danielle's father, Bruce, brought the company from Auburn here, built the first facility, then they built the Danaran facility. You worked with them on each instance. And they took over the Walmart facility and they've since expanded that to provide more room for Danaran. We're really excited. This is the first time we're going to say this publicly. We just lined everything up around this meeting because we had to come to you for this technical issue of the change. But we're transitioning to the third generation. Danielle, as she leaves here today, will be the president. Bruce will become director of strategic growth. We've got an opportunity to bring in some significant venture capital to help them have the financial horsepower to go national. Headquarters is going to be here. All jobs are remaining. All jobs are probably on the looking up for us, which is really exciting for us. But we wanted to come and explain that today, and we appreciated the confidence of the IDA to allow you to come and make this really the first time we said this publicly. With that, I'll have what's about to be our new president speak to you about the company.
Hi, everyone. I think I know many of you, but my name is Danielle Bonifiglia-Worth. I'm part of BonaDent's third generation, and as Sean mentioned, excited to move into the role of president and CEO. As I'm sure you're probably aware, BonaDent has been in our community for many, many years. We look forward to continuing to grow in the community. This transaction provides us an opportunity to really accelerate our growth. We've got a really strong, youthful, tenured management and technical team working for us here in Seneca Falls, and so we're really excited to be able to take that platform and expand nationally. So we appreciate your continued support and helping us to do that.
Wonderful. Any questions from the board? Maybe I should explain a little bit the nature of what the specific request is. So for those of you that are newer, our pilot documents, which are the lease back, have a provision in there that if majority ownership of the company is changing, then that triggers the need for consent and approval by the IDA board in order to continue the pilot. So because of this new investment, that is triggering the change in majority ownership of the company, which is why they're here today with their request for board approval.
The reality is you're keeping the same program that you had out there, just allowing it to continue.
Correct.
So,
Quick question, you'll be adding jobs
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely our goal.
and your candidate pool will be local or you'll be reaching for outside the area to come
wherever
in?
they get.
Our initial goal is to seek locally. In fact, we've initiated some training programs in the last 6 months to look at sort of how we take entry-level individuals and get them to speed, which will not only sort of fill jobs created from accelerated growth, but also allow us opportunities to grow the people we have and backfill those positions. So that's our first look at any time is always locally.
Good.
Yeah.
And how many jobs you have there now?
We have, so here in Seneca Falls, we probably have about 200 to 210 of our total, about 275. So the majority of our jobs are obviously here.
Great. Glad to have you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good example of someone starting out and continually growing and at least staying here to do that.
Yeah, we're excited.
Other questions? Okay,
Great.
thank you,
Well,
Danielle.
thank you all very much. We appreciate it.
So before us, and everyone has in their package, is Sarah said, more of a technical change because of change in majority ownership. All the same terms and conditions apply, still under IDA's project review and recapture policy. So if the pilot doesn't live up to the, desired performance, we can still go back. So, I have no concern with that at all. So with that said, have a motion to approve the resolution.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Kelly?
Mr. Russo?
Yes.
Mr. Guthrie?
Yes.
Mr. Kine?
Yes.
Mr. Tom Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Mr. Lot, Mr. Bruce Murray, Mr. Trout, absent, motion carried.
Next on the agenda is a review of an approval of the IDA resolution for the Kanagy. I guess that's how you pronounce it?
I think it's Kanagy, right, Tim?
Kanagy?
Yes, second, Sarah's correct.
Okay, Kanagy Solar Farm Project.
Okay, so we have Tim on the phone here on behalf of the project I'm going to let him introduce himself, give you all some background on the project, and then he can answer any questions you may have. So Tim, take it away.
Sure thing. Thank you. My name is Tim Corley. I'm president of Track Engineering. We are the design project manager engineers for this project. As Sarah stated, I'm on the line today just because Jason Klein, the representative of Kanagy, cannot be in attendance today. But I'll give you a brief introduction of what we are, what we're doing, and the project that we're talking about here today. The Kanagy Solar Farm is located in the town of Romulus, just east of the depot. For those who are local, we're we're on the west side of 414, kind of catty corner from the Romulus Central School District. We have leased and in the process of subdividing out 17 acres from a 67-acre parcel of land owned by Sylvanus Kanagy. The project itself is going to be located, as I said, west of 414, west of the old railroad grade, very well hidden back in there. It's kind of centralized with the tree rows around it that it's very unobtrusive to the surrounding neighborhood. What we're looking to do is develop a 3.6 megawatt community solar system. That community solar system will tie into an existing substation to the west of the facility over on the other side of 96 is the substation in Romulus there that we're going to connect to. Just to give a little bit of background, the Kanagy Solar Farm LLC is the applicant. They are a subsidiary of CSG Developers. CSG Developers is a solar project or a solar company out of New Bedford, Mass. They have several projects in the Massachusetts area, and they are currently expanding into the New York region. Right now, CSG Developers, we have 4 approved solar farms that we've gone through the town approvals within the last 4 to 6 months. Right now, we have one project that we got approved earlier this year at the Tioga Downs Casino. That project is currently under construction. We started construction approximately 2 weeks ago. As I said, we have 4 projects that are approved, 3 more that are under various types of review processes with the towns, with DEC. So we are getting a foothold in the area. We are looking to finalize some of the final agreements here with the Kanagy system so we can move on to the bidding and construction project, or bidding and construction aspects of the project. As I said, the project itself is about 3.6 megawatt, which is squarely within the New York State Community Solar System, or Community Solar Projects. We have gone through and received our approvals from NYSEG for the connections. We have all of our approvals in line. We're essentially ready to go with that, but as we are working through our final administrative requirements with the pilot agreement through the town, the school district, and the IDA. Once we work through that process and secure our final approvals, we're looking to begin construction probably in springtime as we move forward. Once we know we have all of our approvals in line, our our longest lead time is procurement of materials, just to make sure we have everything in line. So once we get an approval from all the entities, we will proceed with ordering materials to get those on site for construction. Typically, our construction takes about 4 months, given various site conditions and timing of the year, and then approximately another 4 to 6 months to actually make the interconnection into the grid. So we're hoping that if everything goes well, we'll have our project up and running and tied into the grid by the end of 2023. With that, some of the questions I know that I'll kind of give you a little bit more background on the project and hopefully avoid some questions in the future here. But what we're looking at is the overall project with the solar farm of this size and nature is we are not going to have any type of full-time employees on site. Typically, these sites are monitored remotely. And with that being said, typically we'll have one technician in the area that's one of our employees that's going to be monitoring it on a semi-regular basis. In other words, the facility will be monitored in the office. If any type of problem or potential red flag or something that doesn't sit well with the guys in the office, we will send a technician out to review the site. Typically, they will arrive in a pickup truck, walk around the site, take a look at it, but they're not on site full time or anything like that. So we're probably, I think as part of our application, we noted there'll be one part-time employee that will be dispersed amongst our various sites throughout the southern tier region. In terms of construction, a lot of the solar projects are specialty type contractors. We are currently in the process of interviewing and soliciting bids from several different solar installers, some from Massachusetts, Vermont, New York, Ohio. There's a wide range of people that have the necessary specialties and where they're coming from. At this point in time, we have not selected a contractor, but we are soliciting bids. As part of our requirements to them, is we provide a set of plans and a request to try to utilize local workforces as they can. I know it's difficult for some of these guys just because of the specialty work that they're doing and the equipment they have, that sometimes they can't always do that, but we've tried to make a provision in there that they try to look at local workforce. We're anticipating probably around 50 construction jobs for that 4 to 6 month period and for the duration of the construction period. Again, once we get all of our approvals in hand, we're looking to go construction to do that, and hopefully get the thing online by the end of the year. You guys have any questions? I'll try to answer them as best I can.
Questions?
Jim, this is Ben Guthrie, one of the board members. How are the increase in interest rates affecting your project? And no doubt you designed it before the increase. How's that affecting you?
I don't have the nuts and bolts on all the intricacies, but obviously interest rates do play into it. And at this point, we are still moving forward with it.
Good. And how long is your power purchase agreement?
Our agreement, we're looking, we're in that, all of our estimates are based upon a 20-year lifespan for the project.
Okay. And do you plan other projects in the area? Like how much, so you bought a bigger piece of land, can you expand that in the future, or can the interconnection actually handle a bigger field there?
So it's a twofold question there, correct? So the project that we have for this Kanagy solar farm that we're presenting here today is, this project is standalone. With the New York State Community Solar, our maximum megawattage we can push into the grid from one community system is 5 megawatts to maintain compliance with the New York State's regs on that. However, if additional land would come up available in surrounding areas, it would be essentially a separate project, a standalone project by itself. For instance, if the land next door, obviously we would look at it, but it would be independent of anything we're doing here today. And then the second fold of that is the capacity of the receiving system. As part of our analysis, when we selected the site, we, in discussion with NYSEG, we submitted some initial calculations in to determine what the grid, more specifically what the substation would handle. And typically in some of the more rural areas like this, we're limited by the capacity of the substation. If we overload the substation, we're responsible for upgrading the equipment there. And a lot of times at that point, the cost to the infrastructure upgrades to the substation, those costs outweigh the benefits of the project. So at some point, like this system, we're kind of limited as amount of we can put in there just because of the capacity of the substation.
Yeah,
So,
we're well aware of those
and
limitations.
the way things look right now, that we would not have another project in this general area just because of the fact that the substation's maxed out. And if you wanted to make it, you would have to upgrade the substation significantly and have a much bigger project to make it worth your while to make those upgrades.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have other questions for Tim? No?
No?
Okay. Well, thank you, Tim. We appreciate your time. I guess we'll turn it over for the vote, but you don't have to stay on the line for the rest of our meeting if you have other business you need to attend to.
Okay, I'll listen to the vote and then I'll jump off then. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So, any other questions then? Hearing none. Can you have a motion to approve the Kanagy Solar Farm project inducement? And second?
The amounts on this are exactly the same as the other programs we've done for the solar programs.
Yeah, and so this inducement is obviously not even getting into the pilot terms, but we would move to do our standard solar pilot per our UTAP, yes.
And this is just setting up a public hearing?
This is just to set up the public hearing,
Right.
getting the process moving.
And then we'll be back at another time for final approval.
Correct.
But when you go to the public hearing, you'll be talking about, the reductions and what they would or wouldn't be paying at the public hearing.
Correct, yes, and we'll do a cost benefit analysis for the project as well.
Okay. So did I get a second then? Second. Okay. So Kelly?
Mr. Russo?
Yes.
Mr. Guthrie?
Yes.
Mr. Kine?
Yes.
Mr. Tom Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Mr. Lott, Mr. Bruce Murray, and Mr. Trout. Absent, motion carried.
Okay. Next, items to be disposed of, Sarah?
So this is just as an FYI to the board. We did have to get rid of our Toshiba printer this year. It was having old and having some paper jam issues, so we did dispose of that and get a new printer. Just to make a note of it, offhand, we don't have a value specifically for it. If anybody was really interested, we could try to get you a depreciation schedule on a printer, but I don't think that's probably necessary. Just as an FYI. Maybe we just move on to the next thing, our meeting schedule. You all have that. So typical would be the first Thursday of each month, except for March, where we're proposing March 23rd meeting, and that is so that we can discuss the audit in time to get that posted for Paris. And then because of that, we will not have a meeting in April. We'll meet again in May. Anybody have any questions or comments or issues that they know of as of right now with this schedule?
Nice paper, we could frame it.
Yeah.
That's good. And then next is the loan status report.
So Steve touched on this a little bit in our financials. We have three current loans and one that has been just as of recently paid in full. So BonaDent, Best Made Products, and Schrader Farms are all current on their loan payments. Pine Tree has fully paid off their loan. The other three, you can see the nearest end date is BonaDent in 2026, the furthest out Schrader Farms in 2031. Does anybody have any questions about the loan status report?
And at this point, there's no pending applications for loans.
No. We had a few in the pipeline, and we won't really get into too much on the specific side, but we did have a few that we were anticipating applications from potentially. We are in the process of trying to follow up with some of those projects and see if there is still potentially a need for a loan or not. But as of this report, we currently have about $844,000 on hand to lend. So we are looking for ways to get those loan funds out into the community.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Next on the agenda is an update on the Willard property.
So this is kind of a large update. You guys had a couple of items that were included with the briefing memo and are on the table for you. So one is a Gantt chart, in case anybody is interested. This is something that we have drafted and has also been shared with the Willard Task Force, just a way of managing the project timeline for this. As you will see, we only really go out on this schedule until July 1st of this coming year. Obviously, this is going to be a much longer term project than that, but these are really the near term items. So we have this sort of divvied up into 3 buckets, the first being advocacy and communications. There have been a few tours of the facility. There was one that was led by the state in August. That was largely for state officials and elected officials. The IDA then hosted a second tour in October, and then a third one was hosted recently by the Historical Society, and the goal of that was to gather some folks from the historic preservation community to get their thoughts on the site. And as of right now, it looks like the folks that took part in that last tour are going to be participating in the next Willard Task Force meeting to share some of their perspective and expertise and advice on potential next steps. Yeah, Ben.
At the meeting, there was conversation about a recording of the woman who talked about the various
Yes.
projects like this. Is that available yet?
Yes, that is available. I can send that out. So it's an audio recording and a slideshow, and that was done by, hi Ralph, that was done by Katie Como from the New York State Preservation League. She gave a presentation at the Romulus Historical Society meeting and gave some background on other asylum properties specifically that have been redeveloped or in the process of being redeveloped, and she gave some perspective on what types of effort, what types of development those communities have undertaken. So I'd be happy to share the links. I'll send that out to the task force and also to the IDA board in case anybody is interested. But she has also offered to come in and actually give the presentation to anybody that might be interested. So if you would rather all see it done in person, we could certainly invite her to be a speaker at one of our next board meetings.
Is she not involved in it?
I should know this, and I'm not sure where she is out of actually. I'd have to look.
Can you spell her last name?
Comeau.
Question.
Yeah.
When she gave that presentation and she said she's been involved with other redevelopment projects, are any of them of this scale or bigger than what Willard is?
So the presentation that she gave was not projects that she specifically has been involved in. She did some research and pulled, she did give one example in New York State, which was the former Buffalo Asylum, which is now the Richardson Olmsted Complex. If anybody is familiar, it is right near Buffalo State. And it's a big, beautiful historic building that they preserved that was got a lot of momentum in Buffalo because the architect and the landscape architect that originally designed the campus are very well renowned, and so there was a big effort to preserve that. So it is a multi-phase process. The redevelopment is not complete. The first phase was a hotel. It became Hotel Henry. Some of you may have heard of it. It opened just a few years before the pandemic. The pandemic was not kind, unfortunately, to the new hotel. So the facility is actually owned by the corporation that did the the redevelopment. They're not an IDA, but they'd be similar to like a nonprofit local development corporation. So they actually built the hotel to specs and then brought on their own hotel operator to run it. And they are now in the process of finding a new hotel operator and reopening. And then they have some plans to find tenants to do some housing options and some retail and other uses at the site. But there are a lot of resources on their website that we've been looking at. I actually spoke with the new president of that corporation just a few days ago to get some insight, and he's making introductions to some other folks that were involved in the project in its early days. But then Katie's presentation also touched on some facilities in other states as well that were asylums, because obviously Willard Drug Treatment Center was one of the correctional facilities closed by the state, but it really doesn't resemble any of the other correctional facilities that were closed by the state. And if you're looking for something that's more comparable, a lot of these other asylums in style and scale of the property are more similar to Willard, although they don't all necessarily have waterfront or some of those other assets. So keep a lookout for that. Getting back to this chart, so there's a couple other things that we broke down you can see here. We've identified some potential funding options to support different needs at Willard, although it's still really too early in the sense that we don't have specific asks for anything. The soonest one would likely be related to the highest and best use study in the RFP that just went out. We did just send that out before Thanksgiving. It's gone out to 3 firms that Greater Rochester Enterprise introduced us to, another 2 firms that we've connected with. Dave is continuing to try to find some more just to make sure that we have a broad net that we're casting, and then we've sent it as well to a few folks locally, either to respond to themselves or to connect with folks that they know that have expressed an interest in the property. So that is getting pushed out, but if anybody knows of anybody that has expressed an interest, certainly we're looking for all potential options at this point. We've also spoken with the Urban Land Institute. So they are like a professional international agency really of essentially like a planning type of agency, but it's not just specific to planners. There are developers, there are land economists, and they have an advisory services program that would function similarly to what we are looking at in the RFP. We've talked with them a little bit about their program. It's certainly not as specific or detailed as what we were hoping to accomplish, but obviously as we get responses, we'll get a sense of how feasible it is financially to accomplish versus maybe some other options. So we can discuss that more in detail as we get RFP responses.
Taking in the current economic situation as they do this, or they just do an assessment of it irrelevant of where the current economy's at?
So they would be taking stock of where the current economy is at, especially in the RFP. A copy of it was included in the packet for you all, and it's really sort of a twofold. It's an assessment of the physical assets at the site, but then the highest and best use study is really meant to get at some of the market factors and some of the economics that would indicate potential uses of the property as well as public input. So an ideal respondent would take all of those factors into consideration. We'll see what kind of quality we get.
Yeah.
Our deadline is just about end of January, so we still have a couple months to wait on that.
It's one thing to come up with some ideas what you could do with this. It's another thing to say, is it a viable thing to do?
Yep.
I just wonder how they sort that out.
Yep.
Some of you are good at it, and already touch on it.
So we will have to wait and see more about that. Let me see here my notes, what else we have about Willard. So the task force, we did have our first meeting just before Thanksgiving. There's 16 people from the community on the task force. That initial meeting was really to talk about the role of the task force and some initial action items that the group needed to take. Jeff is working on a communications plan for the group. I had a few items to reach out to New York State on. And then a butter from Cornell Cooperative Extension is looking into some potential collaborations with Cornell students to help do some research and some projects related to the Willard campus. So we're off to a good start. And like I said, at our next meeting, I think we'll be having the folks that took the tour most recently share some of their thoughts and perspective. The task force is planning to meet monthly. So we can give you all regular updates on that. And as we go, we may end up opening up those meetings in certain instances to more members of the community. But right now it's really meant to be a very action goal-oriented group and not really meant to just give updates for the sake of giving updates. So hopefully we can kind of maintain that trajectory. We'll see where things go, but I thought it was a good first step.
The meeting.
Yeah.
Sarah, Bruce Murray had mentioned that he was looking at some of the Blue Book.
Yes.
Where did he have access to that?
So that I had to send a Dropbox link. So the meeting agenda for the task force meeting, at the bottom there is a link to Dropbox that has the Blue Book. It's like 447 pages of facade photos and blueprints and model numbers for all the boilers and systems at the site. It's really comprehensive, really interesting. We are looking at options currently for document sharing platforms and how we can go about so that members of the task force and other members of the community can have access to these types of documents because they're just too big to share as regular PDFs in an email. But if anybody is interested, let me know. I can send you the Dropbox link. It's kind of an interesting thing to peruse, but definitely not light reading. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Sorry. Just a comment or a thought. In terms of timeline, something you might talk about. So many are just kind of think about I'm not committing anything on behalf of, I'm speaking as the town FAD supervisor, that's it. I'm not replacing Don or anything. But there are $6 million in ARPA funds.
Mm-hmm.
It would seem, from my perspective, it would be a fair request. The timeline may not work, it may be a drop in the bucket, I don't know. But to think about if some of those ARPA funds could be dedicated to Willard in some way or fashion. Problem is that timeline is running out quickly in terms of when we have to have that money dedicated and spent. So I'm just kind of thinking, I'm throwing that out there to say, hey.
So what is the deadline right now?
I believe it's end of 2025.
Okay. So my initial thoughts are, at least based on what I found out from the Urban Land Institute, because they don't do it, their advisory services panel for free. They said their process costs $135,000, and like I said, what they do seems to be professional and high quality, but it doesn't even begin to touch on some of the things that we were hoping to get out of our RFP. So if we use that as sort of $135,000 is like the cheapest we're going to get, we could very well be looking at a lot more than what we had sort of budgeted between our existing grant and the additional funds that we had set aside in the IDA budget. So I think that there may be a near-term ask potentially to support a highest and best use study from ARPA funds.
Because right now, I'm not on the ARPA committee, is kind of a loosely met with the supervisors, but there's still that $6 million or so out there as of today. I personally don't think it would be a bad ask to commit $1 million to something in Willard. Just a lot.
Yeah. I think that would be great if it was. Yes. Yes, of course. I mean, I guess the question becomes, how specific does the ask need to be? Would it be possible to try to get make $1 million ask for Willard from the committee to be used at some point within the next couple of years, or does it need to be more specific, like I said, of this much to support a highest and best use study? Because that we could, have an estimate, potentially by February of what the ask would be to support that. But in terms of other things, this is going to be a long process. There's going to probably be a need for a lot of funding over the course of it, and some of it right now we won't even know what needs to be funded in terms of additional studies and things, but definitely think it's worth.
I think that's just it. Right now, it's there's a lot that this project entails, and I know our committee was talking about some of the first identification of whose responsibility. Will the state take responsibility for demolishing some of the properties that are falling in on themselves that need to come down? There's the issue that the town of Romulus is dealing with right now as it relates to water and sewer, and the build out of that has implications. I think there is a huge need for infusion of cash on this project, and I think it's safe to say in whatever capacity the county will be asked to put.
Well, that's one area they could, right, is in terms of water and sewer. That could be something. Infrastructure money could be something.
Right.
Yeah. So we'll see. I think there's definitely gonna be a need. It just, as of right now, we don't have any specific enough numbers to come with a formal ask to the committee.
Just really, I can't emphasize that the clock is ticking.
Yeah.
Not just in terms of being spent, but in terms of the ideas flooding in.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of ideas flooding out.
And I think that's part of why the urgency to set up this task force and get this going. And I would really expect that this task force could help expedite the priorities related to this project, and then come back for a request like that. I think it's a great point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. Ben, you had something you wanted to.
I wanted to respond a little bit to what Tom was asking. I was surprised and pleased to hear that there are other facilities like Willard that have been closed and that have been redeveloped. The one guy was telling me, the photographer was telling me about the Dorothea Dix Hospital. It's in North Carolina, I believe. And it was like 6 years ago, it was transferred over to the city of Raleigh, and they've been redeveloped.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have the complexity of also having been converted to a prison and having mixed use on Central Station for eating and all that. But people are working on how, generating ideas on how to redevelop property like this.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think what's nice to see is in those places they're able to balance sort of the folks that want to see these buildings be preserved for historic reasons, but also see them be reused for real market purposes. You're seeing things like housing, like mixed use in terms of retail, commercial purposes, hotels. Haven't seen anything that's truly on the more industrial side, like converting for a manufacturer, but we have seen this push for different kinds of things that I think could potentially translate to Willard. So it's definitely worth at least listening to the presentation that Katie did. And like I said, I'll send that information out so you guys can hear it if you want, but definitely think it could be worthwhile. Like I said, if the group has enough interest, I'd be happy to invite her to come and present at a board meeting, and
And I just wanted to add before we ended the discussion of Willard, I totally understand maybe what some of you are even thinking about in terms of this project, how massive it is, what are we going to accomplish? But I would say I think it is the direct result of Sarah and the IDA and the partners with Seneca and the county all working together that we were able to move a significant move the needle in a significant way on just getting the state to commit to keeping that property heated properly through the winter, so we can identify some of these priorities associated with it. So I just didn't want it to be left unsaid how massive a win we've already experienced with this project. And I think there is a good opportunity to have people come together to move this project forward in some meaningful way for our community, whatever that is. It's a massive project, I know. And I can't imagine that we're going to have the entire site redeveloped in a timely fashion, but there are definitely, I think, pieces of it that can work for Seneca County. And I'm just proud of what this group has done and others in moving this project, moving this opportunity forward.
Yeah, no, you're right. It is a very daunting project. I mean, the other places that have taken their asylums, all of which were much smaller properties and also closer to major metropolitan areas. You know, one of the things that I remarked about Kay's presentation is we're really the only rural application, and obviously that is potentially going to make things tricky. But you know, that's why I think a highest and best use study is so important, because it's really meant to touch on specifically this community and what we can support and what we need to support the community and to grow. But, you know, these other projects have taken 10 years or more. I mean, none of them are truly at a finished point. So, you know, it is one of those things that I think we need to just acknowledge that this is a very long-term project. And it's really about taking it in small chunks and trying to figure out how do we tackle each piece. And I'm really confident that the task force can start to get its head around some of those things, you know, because each step gets us closer. One other thing to note, so the Prison Redevelopment Commission is expected to release its recommendations related to the correctional facilities before the end of the year. They don't have a specific date, but they did indicate, Empire State Development indicated that they would send us a copy of the report when it's completed, hopefully sometime over the next couple weeks. So I think that pretty much covers the Willard update, unless people have questions or other discussion items related to it.
Just have one. Jeff, you mentioned the heat being done down there. Is there staff there then that's watching and monitoring it?
So they have brought, it is my understanding, and Sarah, you can probably fill in the details on this, but it's my understanding originally they dispersed that staff to other facilities.
Mm-hmm.
I believe now they have brought back some of that staff. There is a crew down there dedicated to the facility.
Yeah, because just to turn the heat back on, who knows if it's working in this building, that building, whatever, somebody's got to maintain.
They have about 14 people, we've been told, that have been brought back and are there. Because they did shut down the heat. I mean, they shut down that facility completely. They had to come back. It took them a couple weeks. Once the decision was made, it took them a couple weeks to get everything turned back on again. But it's on. They've been also going through and making sure that the facility is secure. So there have been some issues with broken doors and windows and things. And the dock staff that is on board has been coming through and fixing those things. So that is positive, and everybody down in Romulus and Ovid have had nothing but good things to say about the local dock staff and how supportive they've been of trying to make sure that this transition process goes well.
Well, thank you, Sarah.
You don't feel the state would have any, if this doesn't proceed further, at some point in time, does the state have any other ideas what they would do with it after they've done these things and put money in there and kept it going? Or are they truly just keeping it going so we have time to take a good look at it? Or is there a backup to that?
Well, I mean, really the backup is that New York State could, and as of earlier this summer, was planning to put out RFPs in the spring for all of the closed correctional facilities to directly solicit potential developers and development proposals. Although I have had a few members of the Prison Redevelopment Commission communicate that part of their recommendations is actually going to be that the state transfer the properties for local control for redevelopment. So I think it could go either way. And part of what the task force is hopefully going to be able to help us assess is what are the true costs associated with this facility, because we really need to get our head around that of things like insurance and snow plowing and mowing and, utilities and whatever other sort of costs there are out there, figure that out. And then, we can start to figure out potential funding sources, ways to support that, ways to try to reduce those costs where possible. And then if we can't locally make the numbers work, if we can't figure out a way, if this were owned by the IDA or by the county or somebody until it was redeveloped, realizing that might take a while, if we can't figure out how to fund the facility during that period, then the only option on the table may be for the state to retain ownership and to directly handle any development proposals. But I think if that ended up being the case, that we would still use the task force to try to serve as an advocacy group with the state to make sure that they are selecting the best proposal. So I think there are two options, and it's really going to depend on what the costs come down to and what we can manage to creatively fund.
I think part of it will become a little bit, part of where the state is coming from, maybe a little clearer with the release of this report at the end of this year. Personally, I don't think the state has any interest in retaining ownership of that property. So I think
and
it's
there's pros and cons to that. One of the things, if they're still an owner, in some ways, if you had some great ideas and you have the ability to do it, you can direct it better. The other side of that is if the state's still involved, still owns it, and you come up with some solutions, they're probably going to be a lot more likely to maybe help come up with some funding to help pull those things off if they're still involved with it. So there's a number of factors you want to think about.
Yeah.
Just getting it may not be the best ones of those. It could be, but it also lets the state kind of walk away.
Yeah, I think if, regardless of what happens, if the state maintains ownership through this year and into next winter, we may have a battle of trying to get the facility heated again for another winter. Yeah. So that's something that we have to kind of wrap our heads around of, what do we do? I mean, the facilities in Katie's presentation, one notable thing is a lot of those were in a lot worse shape than Willard in the sense that they were vacant for a decade or more in most cases. And so rehab is still possible. It obviously becomes a lot more costly to do the redevelopment work at a facility like that versus one that has been somewhat maintained.
Just from my perspective and seeing what I've seen, I would think one of the impediments is that the campus is sort of interconnected. If you turn one building off, you turn the whole building off, right? Mm-hmm. So is there some solution that you can break some of the more marketable assets off in some way? And would the state be a partner to be able to do that? Because that would certainly be expensive.
Yeah, who knows, maybe. Supposedly some of the folks that were on the tour from the historic preservation community, some of them have some ideas to share, I guess, related to splitting the property versus not splitting the property. That's about as much as Katie told me on that as of now. But, one of the things that we had mentioned in the RFP, and, hopefully we can have a firm help us get a sense of this too, would be, how feasible is it to subdivide the property and how would you go about it and what costs would there be associated with having to redo some of the infrastructure? Because I'm sure to some extent anything is possible. It's just a matter of how much are you willing to pay for it, So we'll find out.
We're at a critical juncture where there could be a demonstration project for new ways to heat buildings because it's got the old design of a centralized steam plant. If you want to break off buildings, you got to come up with a new way, whether it's heat pumps or solar panels or what. Some way to heat the building.
Yeah.
Heat and cool.
That is probably going to be, at least from the sense I have now, I think that infrastructure, the fact that most of the campus is interconnected, I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges to redeveloping it.
I just hope your group is looking at why you're doing this. A lot of great ideas, ways to do things, what you might be able to do with it. the scope of potential development, there probably ought to be a group looking at and thinking about what you just said a little while ago. You know, we get to the end of next year and the heat's got to get turned on or not. What are we going to do? You might have a bunch of great ideas out there, but somebody ought to be thinking of how do we work with the state? How do we work with whoever? So that when we get to fall next year, you've spent a bunch of money, we've done a bunch of things to kind of move this along, and then we just come to an end. So that's one thing that's got to be thought of as you get there. Some people ought to be working on that.
Yep.
Not a negative, right? I'm just kind of.
No, you're right, and that's part of why I said, this Gantt chart is sort of just our visualization of timing for a period, but really there's a lot more that needs to be added that's going to impact, this project, and we're going to need to tap on a lot of different people to try to get our heads around all of these pieces so that things are happening sort of as cohesively, as simultaneously as possible. It's going to be challenging, but I think we're up for it, so we'll keep you all posted.
Next on the agenda is an update from the Seneca County Chamber of Commerce. So Jeff?
Sure, certainly, Bruce. So I think when I make this report every month, I talk a lot about tourism promotion, and we are certainly hard at work at the Chamber putting together a plan for promoting our community from a tourism visitation standpoint over the coming year in 2023. But equally, I think as important, and I don't always touch on it, is some of the business support services that our chamber staff are working on right now. This is an incredibly busy time for us. We do have a smaller office, so it's kind of unique that our chamber is in this position. But one of the things we do is offer businesses the ability to access health insurance. And we're right in the middle of open enrollment period for setting businesses up on a course of health insurance for their employees and their organizations, as well as we've now become Medicare licensed. So we are helping not just businesses with that, but also members of the community with their Medicare health insurance options. And I think it's a real benefit to the community. It certainly is a busy time for us, but that's one of the examples of some of the support services that we offer at the Chamber. So it's a really busy time.
How small a business can you accommodate?
Individual.
Okay.
So person of one. As small as you get, I guess. As small as you get, right? Up to, we have some larger groups. We actually help people. This is another thing that maybe not everyone realizes. We are the Seneca County Chamber of Commerce, but we have membership and people that we serve in, I think it's 11 of the 14 counties in the Finger Lakes. So our county Chamber of Commerce is provides assistance for a lot of folks out there, a lot of businesses in the region. Other than that, that's I think that's about the extent of my report today.
Sounds good. Next one would be update from the County Board of Supervisors.
Maybe since Jeff Trout is here, I don't know if there's anything on behalf of not to put you on the spot, but is there anything going on with the Board of Supervisors that you'd like to share? Yes.
I mean, my concern is really that the ARPA money and what we're going to do with that. So it's not just Willard, but if there's other ideas out there, again, just commenting on myself, is that I think those are things that if you folks have ideas about it, those should be shared. Because there's ideas being shared among supervisors. There's just not a lot of direction or concrete, okay, we're going to do this with it. Again, the clock is ticking. So if there's, again, just speaking for myself, but if there's things out there this board would like to recommend or through the chamber, I'm all ears because I think otherwise what's going to happen is it's going to get piecemealed in a way without a long-term comprehensive plan of how that money could best be spent. To me, that's kind of agenda item number one.
Mm-hmm.
one thing I will tell you that as a new supervisor, I very much appreciate like the updates that Jeff does at the Board of Supervisors. I think trying to communicate that out in terms of our connections to agritourism, tourism in general, and all those different things, those ancillary projects that come from that is extremely helpful and illuminating so that we can look further down the road and try to plan and just be more collaborative together. Agencies like the idea, and then set sort of a plan in place, some long-term plans. So it just, and there may be things that exist there, but it doesn't feel like that as much.
Jeff, is there a chairman of that committee?
Not really, no. It's an ad hoc committee. There are people appointed to it, but if anything, Supervisor Heisen kind of runs it. And then the way it's set up is requests come in, that committee discusses them, and then they disagree to take those requests forward to the full Board of Supervisors, basically with a thumbs up, thumbs down. That doesn't mean that requests can't come directly to the Board of Supervisors or through another committee. Right now, that's kind of how it happens. There is a current request that's coming up. It's been a standing request to do a $1,000 bonus to county employees for their service during COVID. It's going to run $350,000 to $400,000. Problem is, we're waiting to see, without debating the merits of that idea, trying to figure out. So the state of New York is doing a similar type bonus for healthcare workers. So trying to divine who's going to get that, because you could end up in a scenario where if we pay it now, we overlap. Someone could be getting a $2,000 or more bonus. So that's kind of interesting. My take on it, and again, it'd be nice to know what you folks think. Obviously, Tom and I talk about it all the time, being on town board, but I could see the ARPA money being used for water and sewer development, infrastructure development, Willard, or something related back to tourism. But then, in my mind, create seed money, or leverage money to expand, double that effort, double that direction. I think that's something we have to decide as a board and so.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that One Seneca was pushing for pretty heavily. I mean, really, it was around last December, I think, we were giving presentations to the special committee about an infrastructure survey that was done with some recommendations. And then things kind of got put on hold. The ARPA committee wasn't really meeting as much.
I think we had 5 or 6 suggestions.
Yeah, we had some specifics, and one at the time was related to the industrial park project that we were trying to pursue that didn't pan out for this year. But there was some talk about broadband funding, the water or the sewer upgrades for 5 Points in Willard, which obviously that has been sort of in a state of limbo because of the closure and the need to redesign.
There was a request for broadband that was approved by the committee and was going forward after they did an analysis of where it's needed.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't not too, but it actually wasn't too much money.
Yeah. That's great.
Just one thing, if I could amend my report, because I thought of it. This morning on the One Seneca call, which again would invite all of you and the public to join every Thursday from 10 to 10:30. Some really great conversation being had, information sharing to be had with all of the organizations, particularly the Chamber, the IDA, and the county chair. But what was brought up, I don't remember who brought it up, but we were in discussion about the Micron development to our east. And David and Sarah shared some information about that. One of the partners that come to those One Seneca meetings is the director of the Small Business Development Center at the Onondaga, ours would be the Onondaga Community College. And they commissioned a study based on how semiconductor manufacturers impact a community and the surrounding communities. And thought it was really interesting. He actually shared the study or the results. I haven't had a chance to look through it, but one of the things that he did say was, you know, as you can imagine, you see an influx of food and beverage, you know, restaurant type businesses popping up, human services needs, but just the notion that they are kind of looking at what the potential is. There are some thoughts that as suppliers want to move closer to cut down on the shipping distance to supply that processing, that manufacturing facility, what could be the opportunities for ancillary businesses, you know, in and around the surrounding area. And I know, to your point, Jeff, when you were talking about the presentation I gave for the tourism realm at the last board meeting, one of the questions that was asked was, is the chamber, is the IDA, are there people that are looking at the Micron development in Syracuse area and what the potential could be for Seneca County to capitalize on that development? So just something to be thinking about, certainly for the IDA. I know Sarah and David and Kelly are thinking of this too, but just how can we as a board maybe put our minds and heads together and think about other ways that as the IDA or the chamber or this One Seneca initiative or just the county in general can work towards being attractive for possible developments coming from that development.
Yeah, that's a great point, and something that Bruce isn't here today, but something that he brought up, you know, specifically wanting us to pursue and prioritize. And Dave has been working on that from our side, trying to get a sense of some of the aspects of the supply chain. He's also working with Bob Griffin from SBDC and also with Cornell to try to get some of those answers of, you know, what does the supply chain really look like? And then from there, we have to figure out, you know, what types of needs do these companies have, and, you know, where is Seneca County best suited to potentially serve them, and try to position ourselves for that. So that's kind of a long-term project, but definitely something that we are actively looking at and working on, trying to get our heads around.
And you know, so just
no, you're fine.
Yeah, I think it would be really helpful for this board to think about, if it's so willing, to think about developing that vision and sharing that vision with the county board of supervisors. I think that's where they need help. They need help with the vision. What could be, and then what could be their role in it. I think there's openness to, hey, what is the vision? And I'm sure they'll have comments on it, but I don't feel that there is a lot of self-generated vision right there. We're looking for somebody to provide that vision.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And Jeff does a good job of it, but it needs to, the more of that there is, I think the better off we're all going to be. It's got to be vision.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and something that, you know, when it comes to Micron, obviously we don't have the specific vision yet. I mean, I always like to point people back to the strategic plan as being kind of the basis of a vision, although I guess you could say now that plan is, you know, a few years old, and we've sort of started to organically pursue some things that have come up since then, obviously Willard being one of them, but we can certainly take some steps to try to communicate all of these different things with the supervisors.
Without that vision, again, just my opinion, but there tends to develop this fatalistic, we can't do anything. We're at the mercy of economic winds or the state of New York or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's positive.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Dave, you want to say something?
Well, yeah, in regards to that, like tonight I went today, town hall with Micron and everything over there, because I live down that way. But you know, I'm trying to figure out where we fit in. I'm trying to get connections. You know, I used to work for some of the legislators over there, so I'm getting close.
Perfect. That's why I'm here. Right? You know,
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point, and that's key to Micron. It's also key to Willard, and really key to everything else. And maybe that's actually a good segue a little bit into some of the stuff in my year-end report, and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here, but just where are we going for next year? And a lot of it, I mean, we still are working on ongoing process improvement type things internally, but really where I think the meat and potatoes is trying to get some of these formal visions in place. One of them being developing a formal business attraction strategy. And I think to some extent that incorporates, like the Micron supply chain, but even more broadly, actually trying to get something down on paper and say, here is really, the key types of businesses, even more nitty gritty than what the strategic plan focuses on. I mean, we can all, talk generally about agribusiness and advanced manufacturing and, tourism, but really trying to get a better sense in developing a proper business attraction strategy for the IDA and for the county as a whole. And that's something that over the past couple of years, we've really focused more on the expansion side. And I think we've been, pretty successful there and have sort of let the attraction happen organically and have people come to us. But we are, seeing a need, I think, to be a little bit more proactive on that front. And hopefully that can help us in the planning in the long term. Obviously, we put the industrial park thing on hold. We weren't able to come to terms on a property that the board was interested in pursuing. That is not to say that that is entirely off the table. I still think that there is a need in Seneca County for shovel-ready sites and to have places available for development. And I think, especially once we get a better idea of the Micron supply chain and where we fit in, I think having these sites is going to be key to us being able to have a proper business attraction plan in place. So all of these things kind of need to work together. But first, we're going to come up with the actual strategy and then kind of work from there.
Sarah, I want to just interject here a minute. It goes back to what Jeff and I think we're all kind of hinting at, is that it has to start from the basis of having infrastructure in place to attract businesses or any kind of outside ancillary businesses to even look at Seneca County. We're 2 counties away from where Micron is. And we're 2 counties away from Rochester, basically. And if we don't have the infrastructure in place, or even a plan in place, that I think we just kind of get swept away.
Yep.
So I think, for me, Willard, Micron, all these projects are great, but I think we have to start with having the infrastructure or the plan in place to at least show that we are working towards that.
Yes.
And
yes, I completely hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree. I think it becomes difficult, especially if we're talking broadly about needing to expand infrastructure. It becomes difficult to make that ask of, we need upgrades or we need this or we need that without having a proper, here is where specifically we are targeting and here are generally the types of things that they need. So the goal is that a proper business attraction strategy will allow us to target specific industries and specific even sectors sort of within those industries where we can really start to pinpoint more specific infrastructure needs and figure out, what do we already have the capacity to serve well here and where are we maybe marginally close but need some improvements, and then what are things that maybe would be more of a stretch, but with the investment we could get there. So hopefully we can start to outline some of those things to develop a more long-term, maybe infrastructure investment plan and work with the county on something.
And this is my 2024 goal, 23 goal is, why is it so damn difficult to build anything here? I keep hearing constantly, and I'm trying to divine whether it's just rumor, and people upset versus reality. Why is it so difficult to get something done here versus Ontario County, or Coogee County, or anything else? I don't have my hands around that yet. I know that's shared, at least I know Supervisor Trout has that same concern, and we've talked about it. I think that could be part of what Tom's talking about in terms of what is the strategy to attract businesses. Because it's not just what can we make it easier through, funding or whatever. What are we doing on the regulatory side? Not to make it unsafe or anything, but to make it possible to develop.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it comes down to just trying to be more customer service oriented, and obviously this was one of the things that was laid out in the strategic plan, this idea that Seneca County maybe doesn't have the most business friendly climate, and that's one of the easiest things to pinpoint and one of the hardest to really address when it comes to trying to change things. I mean, obviously, you know, here we try to be accommodating and flexible where possible. We've brought Dave on as a full-time hire to try to help. So when businesses come to us, at least, we can try to help them stay in touch with various agencies and make sure that things don't sort of fall between the cracks, because some of the sense I get is that it's sometimes lack of communication and lack of follow-up, whether it's, you know, the regulatory officials or whether it's the business themselves that gets inundated with things. But that is, you know, that continues to be a challenge with really no perfect quick solution for addressing it, because it comes down to changing people's mindsets.
The board needs to hear that. I cannot make that strongly enough. The board, supervisors needs to hear that.
Well, it sounds like maybe I need to pay a visit to the Board of Supervisors and ask for some time on the agenda soon. So getting back to goals for next year, obviously formal business attraction strategy, somewhat in line with that, our BR&E program is really expanded. We this year have done 63 business visits. We were at 48 last year. So it's growing tremendously, but I really want to start to pay more attention to how do we prioritize certain businesses, certain interactions, how do we make sure that we are having quality interactions and not just quantity. So some of those, addressing some of those items, improving our communication, especially of project information with the various towns. And I know this is a comment actually that has stemmed from Jeff, it's stemmed from some other supervisors, and just trying to develop a better process for how we give them updates on pilots and on what expected revenues are and some of those types of things, and make sure that we're engaging in a positive way. Obviously continue with the Willard redevelopment. We've already talked about Micron, but that's here evaluating opportunities in the county relative to the semiconductor industry. And then really the last sort of big strategic thing, improving the process for evaluating and negotiating pilot agreements. And this is something that we've talked about over the past couple years and had, you know, generally moved toward doing things based on specific needs of specific projects. Obviously, sort of informally, we have worked to standardize our pilots a lot more, but I think it would be worthwhile for us to really take the next step and develop a set of criteria for evaluating projects, develop maybe a proper standard pilot setup as far as payments, and then maybe have criteria for projects that merit something beyond the standard sort of pilot agreement. So be on the lookout for that over the next year as we work on some things. Let's see, so we're jumping around a little as far as what we've accomplished this year. Obviously, we've talked about this a bit. We've done a lot of process improvements. We've implemented, and you've noticed all of this in the financials. We have a new chart of accounts meant to make our financial statements a little bit more accessible, more easy to read for everybody. But certainly if folks have recommendations at any point in time, we're always open to hearing them or to criticism. We have our new project fee schedule in place so that companies have that information more, you know, ahead of time when they're looking at coming to us with a project. Our staff have participated in 8 professional development opportunities this year. We've already talked about the expansion to the BR&E program. We focused this year really on prioritizing our relationship building, particularly with regional and local partners. Locally, it's been done a lot through the One Seneca group, now the Willard Task Force. I think that has really been key to bringing the Chamber, the county, and the IDA closer together than ever before. I think we've had a great start with this new slate of supervisors that are on board and have really enjoyed working with them over the past year. So that's all positive on the regional side. We've been working really closely lately with Greater Rochester Enterprise, New York State Economic Development Council, Empire State Development, all mostly on the Willard project. But we are actually starting to see project referrals come in from Greater Rochester Enterprise, which really wasn't happening over the couple years previously. We've actually had site visits and things and some really promising opportunities. And so I think it's great that we're starting to build that relationship more, and they're, like I said, they're helping us push out our RFP and do some other things. So it's a great sort of long-term relationship that we're building there. There are a couple things that obviously did not happen this year that we had on the agenda. One of them was the industrial park. Like I said, negotiations for the site that we were hoping to get kind of fell through. So that's currently tabled, but I do still see a need potentially in the future for that type of development. So I think that's something that as we have more bandwidth and more of a concrete need identified, that it would be worth reopening that discussion at some point in time. And then completion of the Lowe's water main project. So this was a pilot increment financing deal that we did years ago when Lowe's came in, and the water line was never finished, and now obviously construction costs have gone up greatly, labor, material, all those kinds of things. We still have money in the PIF account to be paid out, but it's not going to cover the cost of construction. So we are waiting at this point on the Village of Waterloo to figure out really what they want to do, if it makes sense financially for them to finish off the loop of the water line, or if we should pay the remainder of those pilot funds to the respective municipalities.
I think we decided, Sarah, so the village, that we're going to use some ARPA. The recommendation to our town board is going to be used to some ARPA money and bond the rest.
Okay.
Because the thought is it's not going to get cheaper, and B, we've got that money from the IDA. Why let that go to waste? Why let it waste? I think that's
How expensive is it?
$110,000. The most recent holdup is the DOT person who oversees it wants it encased, which we haven't had to do that anywhere else, including under other spots in 96A, which added $30,000 to the cost. So we're working with MRB and our town engineer to push back and say this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, this whole project has just been, for a while it was delayed because the line needs to go under the railroad, and there were delays because of insurance liability and getting permission and all of those kinds of things. So this has been a long-term thing. We were hoping it'd get wrapped up this year. It's not. That's continuation for next year. So
it'll be wrapped up next year.
Fingers crossed. And then in terms of our projects that we had this year, so I have made some changes you'll notice in the project data. For 2021, obviously we had some projects in 2021 that really didn't get resolved until this year. So this year we've approved 3 final resolutions. Best Made Products, there was a loan and a pilot for that. Seneca Garden Solar was a pilot, and Wilkins RV was a pilot. Those 3 projects are expected to invest $23.9 million, create and retain 78 jobs in return for $1.76 million in IDA incentives. Which equates to 7 cents in tax exemptions for every $1 privately invested, which is actually the sort of lowest amount of exemptions per project since we have been tracking this. This is 4 years of data now, and really what could be considered the highest return on our investment if you consider our incentives in a project to be investment. So I think that's positive. But obviously you can see in the table the comparisons with previous years. The number of projects actually approved was a little bit down this year. Last year the total capital investment was, $147 million, which was kind of crazy high, but that was because of the Trilina Solar project mostly. So I would say this was a more typical year. And then as we look to next year, there are some graphs here that show you a little bit of what our project pipeline looks like. So let me turn to those. And so we have This is just the same data really represented different ways. So the first is by conversion likelihood. So we track projects as leads, which are sort of the earliest stage, just a concept in some cases. Then there's projects that are on hold. And that is exactly like it sounds. Somebody, had a project they were talking to us about, but then they're like, we're not going to move forward with this sort of indefinitely. It could happen at some point, but it's on hold. Prospects, those are really our strongest projects in the pipeline. So those, the company might have a targeted construction date. They might have some ballpark estimates of what their cost is going to be. They may have started to do the seeker process or other permitting type work. So these are a little bit further along. And then obviously our wins. And these are just our wins for this year, which are the 3 projects we did final resolutions for. So then within each group, kind of just went through and said, okay, based on what we know of these projects, what is the likelihood that they're actually going to move on to the next stage? And I think this is particularly worth talking about when we get to the prospects, the sort of strongest potential projects that we have. I would say that about 8 of them have a high likelihood of converting to a win, so coming to us with an application and making it through our IDA process. About 9 of them are what I would call questionable, really not sure, 50-50, could go either way. None of our projects, we haven't identified any of them as not being likely to convert. On the lead side, which is the earliest stage, there are about 5 that were like, I don't think we're going to be able to move these forward for whatever reason. Either we don't really have space in Seneca County to suit what their needs are, or there are other factors, or we think they might choose another site elsewhere, but we continue to keep them in the pipeline so we can monitor them and maybe something will change. So just to give you a concept, because I know everybody always is curious, what is our budget going to look like? When we do our budget, we do it based on cash that we know is going to be coming into the agency. So that means agreements that we already have in place, or we have received a physical application from a company. We don't put in our budget projects that we think might come to us, but we don't have an application for yet. So what I've done for you at sort of Bruce's request is estimate based on the projects that we think have a high likelihood of converting that are considered prospects. So the strongest project that we have, those 8, believe that they would convert within the next 3 years. There's one that the timeline is a little bit longer because it's a larger scale project, but in total, those 8 projects would bring the IDA an estimated $8.4 million in agency fees. So the future, I think, is looking bright. Just to give you guys an idea of what the project pipeline looks like by industry, you can see that broken down, sort of based on where they are. The prospects are the gray ones in this case. So we've got one in sort of building trades, craft beverage has quite a few. Government, you guys are all aware of that the Village of Waterloo is looking at water treatment facility upgrades. We've got one potentially in hospitality, a couple manufacturing, a few renewable energy, that kind of thing. And then you can also see the breakdown by town if you're interested in the geography. But I'm happy to answer questions as much as I can without divulging the specifics, obviously, of anything that we have not really yet received an application for that isn't already public knowledge. Questions?
That's great.
Okay.
Lots going on.
Yes. Yeah.
What's going on?
It's busy. It's good that we have, we were sad when Pat left, but I'm glad that we were able to hire Dave on, because if it were still just Kelly and I, this would be even more overwhelming than it is.
Okay, nothing under other business?
No.
So we have one item for executive session. So I request a motion to enter into executive session for the discussion of the medical, financial, credit, or employment history of particular persons or matters leading to the appointment, employment, promotion, demotion, discipline, suspension, dismissal, or removal of particular persons. Motion. Second. All in favor? Aye. We're out of executive session. And so the governance committee met earlier this month to discuss performance and pay increases. So I request a motion to approve the governance committee recommendations.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So then, I guess the favorite part of the meeting, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.